All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you so much for being here this morning. It's such a pleasure to spend the day with all of you to celebrate Charles Taylor's life and work. It's very moving to see many friends that I haven't seen for many years, and I'm excited that I'll uh, make new friends today, fellow travelers, and the people interested and stimulated, influenced by Charles' work. We have a very full day, and I first want to thank Dilip and the Center for Transcultural Studies for taking the initiative of organizing this celebration and for reaching out to me and to McGill to partner up. I think it makes sense, right, that this event would take place at McGill, but also that it's based on a partnership between McGill and Northwestern. After Chuck retired from McGill, you, I think, spent many years, right, going at least once a year to teach at Northwestern. So this McGill-Northwestern partnership fully makes sense. So thank you very much, Dilip, for taking the initiative. I want now to introduce you to my dear colleague, Ian Gold, who's also the chair of the philosophy department. And I think that you were one of Chuck's students back in the day, so I'm sure that you can tell us about how it was. So Ian, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Phil. Well, it is a great pleasure and privilege to welcome you all to McGill on behalf of the philosophy department for a day devoted to Professor Charles Taylor. I'm representing, in fact, the Dean of Arts as well as myself. She wasn't able to be here, so she sent me. So one difference between the old days and now is that the old days I didn't need glasses. Lisa Shapiro has sent me some remarks that she asked me to read, so I'll start by reading her remarks. She says, I regret that I cannot join you today to welcome you as Dean of Arts at McGill and to express directly my great appreciation of the work of Professor Charles Taylor. As I joined McGill only recently, others will have had significantly more experience working with Professor Taylor as a student, a colleague, or even both. Nonetheless, as a philosopher, I have long appreciated Charles Taylor's work and so wanted to provide more than the usual welcome of a celebration of the work of a distinguished colleague. Sources of the Self was published right when I started as a doctoral student. I recall an animated discussion with a fellow student and now one of my oldest friends about whether self should take the definite article. Sources of the Self and essays like Self-Interpreting Animals and The Concept of a Person that interweave a philosophical position about the relation of reason and the passions with methodological considerations resonated and worked their way into my own work on early modern philosophy. His work had a tremendous impact on me personally. He impacted many things. The range of Taylor's engagement with the kinds of questions that attract so many to philosophy in the first place, and his rare ability to combine analytic rigor with an unflagging commitment to the questions themselves is and remains remarkable. In rereading some of his work, I was struck by its lucidity and its pointedness about questions that can seem vague. I look forward to reading his most recent Cosmic Connections once my role as dean affords me the opportunity to do so. Taylor also has a singular ability to translate what are abstract philosophical questions into very real practical political contexts, as in the Bouchard-Taylor report, a copy of which I found in the shelves in the Dean of Arts office. Seems to me a bad omen. If I were dean, I wouldn't be happy about that. Which gave citizens living through a difficult time here in Quebec ways to understand, or rather to interpret themselves and to better shape what they're doing, and so to be able to do better, to live together better. He has shown over his career just how philosophy, when done well, not simply has real social value, but also is essential to society. Perhaps this week it's particularly meaningful that you have convened to celebrate his philosophical achievements, for we can certainly draw on Charles Taylor's methods to find the right role of philosophy in these times. So, welcome to McGill, and I wish you a very successful discussion and celebration of Charles Taylor's work. I'd like to just pick up on Lisa's last comment, because I think Professor Gaonkar and Professor Maclure must have had a horrifying premonition that this week would be the week when we most need the inspiration and the comfort, I would say, of Professor Taylor's work. I think going back to ideas about the importance of community, the importance of recognition, personal, political recognition, the importance of multiculturalism, and the importance of dialogue across the cultures. Dialogue seems to be something that human beings have forgotten in the last 10 years. So I think, certainly speaking for myself, today is a very important day for those of us in need of some of that comfort, a comfort of what I think is the most humane philosophical vision of social life and political life that I know of. And I should say that it's a vision that could only have come from a human being who is himself as generous and open-hearted and considerate of others as Professor Taylor is himself. I've known Professor Taylor, I was reflecting yesterday, actually. I first met Professor Taylor, I was horrified by this. I met him 40 years ago this September, which is actually quite impressive given that he and I are both still in our 20s. And I met him because a friend of mine, Anna Skrzewska, knew Professor Taylor. And she said to me, you know, Charles Taylor was a professor at Oxford. I had vaguely heard of Oxford. And she said, at Oxford, they teach one-on-one tutorials. So why don't we ask him to do a tutorial with us? And I said, okay, sounds good. So she went to Professor Taylor and she said, Ian and I would like to read the 3 critiques this year. Would you teach them to us? An idea was utterly ludicrous. And more ludicrously, Chuck said, sure, that sounds like a fun thing to do. And so we did this. And for the whole year, we met once a week for an hour and a half. That was the official time. He always gave us more time. We met for an hour and a half, and we read through the 3 critiques. And I remember those occasions as electrifying, intellectually electrifying. He never once canceled. He never once gave us anything less than the full time and indeed more. And in fact, I remember one occasion when, with Professor Taylor's guidance, I finally came to understand what Kant meant by appearance. And it was like a jolt of electricity went through my body. And I have no doubt that that moment was important in my decision to become a professional philosopher. Like every academic, I spent a lot of time doing one-on-one teaching with students, not as much as Chuck did, no doubt. And I always think of him as the paradigm of the teacher and the tutor and the ideal to which I aspire, though I know I fall very, very far short of his of the high standards he set. So it is really a privilege for me to be able, after all these years, to express my deepest appreciation of his generosity and what he contributed to my life, both intellectually and professionally. So on behalf of the philosophy department, Professor Taylor's former home, and the Faculty of Arts, welcome to McGill. I wish you all a stimulating and a comforting day.
Hi, I'm Dilip Gaonkar. I'm the director of the Center for Transcultural Studies. I'm also a professor at Northwestern University in program in Rhetoric, which you know is the enemy of philosophy. Rhetoric, media, and publics. I'm here, my presentation is billed as opening remarks, but I'm not doing anything as big as opening remark. How can you give opening remarks to a symposium dedicated to life and works of Charles Taylor? That would go on endlessly. Last night at the dinner, Craig Calhoun tried to do something like that in 15 minutes. He did very nobly. I cannot really do that. So instead, I'm here to give thanks. To give thanks first to Charles Taylor. He's been with the Center for Transcultural Studies, which I represent. Although I'm in Northwestern, Charles taught for 5 years at Northwestern. Center for Transcultural Studies is not affiliated to Northwestern University. It is an independent scholarly network, operate completely autonomously. And it's a very unique kind of a center, and which has been nurtured over since 1973 which used to be known as Center for Psychosocial Studies, and then it changed its name to Center for Transcultural Studies in the 80s. The important thing is it is a refuge in some way from all kind of institutional politics of the universities. It brings together people from various places, various disciplines, for some time continuous, engagement, sometime interrupted engagement, but it does a kind of a unique function for bringing up people across the globe, across the institutions, across the discipline. And this center, like any other center, which has got limited resources, kind of a floating network of people, has good times and bad times, good days and bad days. So you need somebody to sustain it and support it. And Charles Taylor, who has been associated since about 1987 with the Center for Transcultural Studies, which is about nearly 40 years, and he has been a president of this center for about 20 or more years. And he has been the main center of gravity which holds this network together. He has been provided intellectual agenda as sort of a trajectory, and variety of ways he's served as a friend, mentor, and also benefactor, material as well as intellectual. So we are very grateful for Charles Taylor to make this network endure. And also his wife, Ob Ballard Taylor, she's also been very much part of this program. So I want to thank also Ob for making our center endure. And the center, is obviously, in expression of gratitude, is organizing this conference in honor of Charles Taylor's life and work. And when we decided where to hold it, of course, Northwestern was a possibility because of my own institutional resources there. And he was there for 5 years as a visiting university professor. So he's got lots of followers and admirers. But upon reflection, it struck me that really the real home of Charles Taylor is McGill and Montreal and Department of Philosophy at McGill. So we decided that we will actually hold it at McGill. And obviously, the person who was the perfect partner for that is Jocelyn Maclure, professor. So I called him up and sent an email. You don't call up these days, right? I sent him an email, and immediately he agreed to do it. Not only does he agree to do it, when you run institutions, you realize there are two kinds of friends and colleagues: those who reply to your email immediately, as opposed to people who take 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, or never, you know. So he's one of those who replies immediately. So we have had a very, very effective partnership in organizing this. So I want to thank Jocelyn very, very much about bringing this to fruition. And also he brought with along several other members of the McGill, especially philosophy department. So Ian Gold is here, Lisa Shapiro, the dean wanted to come here. Obviously, deans have all kind of contingency to which they have to attend. And also he mobilized several other faculty members who will participate, whom I didn't know. So very much thank you to Jocelyn. And then, of course, the Center for Transcultural Studies is a network. It's not just Charles Taylor and me. There's a whole group of people who all agreed, a lot of them. And we have people coming as far as from New Delhi, India. Rajeev and Tani Bhargava have come from all the way from Delhi. And then we have Jens Belgian, who's come from Erfurt, and then, so there was Nilüfer Göle, who was going to come from Turkey till she felt, she had some health issues, she couldn't come. So we have had people, and then we have Claude Romano, who's come from Paris. And then we have people from California, from, Houston and several other places. So I don't have to name all the places. This is all the kind of places where his friends in Center for Transcultural are dispersed. But his association is not only with McGill and Montreal and Center for Transcultural Studies, but he's also got a extensive network of people. And of course, I didn't mention Paolo Costa has come from Italy. So he's met all these people elsewhere where he has gone for institutional reasons and for presentations and all. And everywhere he goes, he makes connection, he makes friends, he finds people who are interested in his work, and very often he has been able to bring them to Center for Transcultural Studies. So many of those people are also here. So I want to thank those people who are affiliated with Charles through the intellectual community all over the world. Many of them are here. Some of them couldn't make it, coming from abroad costs a lot of money these days, especially airfare is going up like crazy. So as a result, but nevertheless, those who are not here and those who are here, I'm very grateful for all these networks which Charles has made it possible for Center to have. So finally, I want to say, as you all know, Charles not only, every time he had an invitation to go to Northwestern, came back, went to Oxford, came back to McGill and to Montreal. He went to Harvard and Berkeley and came back. So he's always been a Canadian, Montreal person and a McGill person. And he has raised a big family here. And many of his members of the family are going to be here, or they're already here, or they're going to be here. And one of the things you run into is when a important person with a lot of heavy schedule is spending a lot of time with different groups of people, especially something like Center for Transcultural Studies, where people don't know what is he doing with Center for Transcultural Studies. So the children and grandchildren become envious of the time. But Charles's family has been always very supportive and enthusiastic about the time he spent with Center for Transcultural Studies, because I assume every time he came back energized. So in a way, we are also very grateful to the fact that his family has been so supportive of his affiliation with Center for Transcultural Studies. So those are the 4 groups of people I wanted to thank. And I'm really grateful. Many of you are here. And with that, I'm going to conclude, because there is about 15 presentations which will talk about life and works of Charles Taylor. I don't need to tell you anything about it. Thank you. And the first panel chair is going to be Craig Calhoun, and he will introduce the format, because it is being filmed and it's going to be posted eventually on YouTube. The protocol is the panel chair will introduce each speaker separately, one by one, and very minimally, because it is my assumption each person, as they give presentation, as you saw from Ian, saw from Lisa, everybody in trying to talk about their involvement, engagement with an encounter with Charles Taylor will say something about themselves. So there is no reason to say anything other than the name, the institutional affiliation, and disciplinary association. So they can also have their 15 minutes of presentation. So we're going to do it that minimally. Here is Craig Calhoun, a professor of all kinds of things. From Arizona State.
Okay, good morning. It's a pleasure to chair this first panel, and I will attempt nothing about me and no details about Charles. Some of you got to hear something at dinner last night. The first panel focuses on Charles' extraordinary and highly influential book, A Secular Age, and the first speaker in the first panel is José Casanova, professor of sociology and religion emeritus at Georgetown University, long time at the New School, and a hugely influential author on themes of public religion, secularism, and the contemporary era. José.
Well, thank you, Craig, and thank you, Charles, for bringing us together. It's a great pleasure and a great honor, actually, to be the first presenter on a secular age. I know what else can be said that has not been said about the secular age. I'm going to make 3 brief remarks. One about grand narratives, the other about which age are we living in, is a secular age or a post-secular one, and third about the thirst for divinization. So the grand narratives, as you know, there was a theory that it was the end of grand narratives, and single-handedly Charles Taylor has basically defeated this postmodern theory and has come up with three ever grander and grander narrative sources of the self, the secular age and now cosmic connections, and has proven that we are narrating, storytelling language animals, and that we need grand narratives to make sense of ourselves and our world, and that when we have bad grand narratives, as he has said so many times, you just have to write better ones. And so the question, why did secular age such a grand narrative? Because he was able to interweave together the four competing narratives we had about our modern age. And the first one is the grandiose Christian triumphant narrative that modernity is basically the culmination of Christian culture and civilization. This was, of course, Hegel's teleological theory, the triumph of freedom, and was taken up by liberal Protestantism, Weber, Trelch, and then Talcott Parsons in the United States. So this is one. And then, of course, and this is what is so great about his narratives, he shows how each narrative basically produces a counter narrative that basically opposes it. And of course, this was the counter narrative of basically organicism, the laws of paradise, the laws of our cosmic meaning, and basically fragmentation, nihilism. That modernity is basically a constant decline, beginning with the Protestant Reformation, all the way through Enlightenment, liberalism, etc. This was, of course, mostly a Catholic narrative, but of course, you have other traditionalist narratives also. Against these two, you have then the grand narrative of secularist assertion of the legitimacy of the modern age, Hans Blumenberg, and arguing that no, it's neither a Christian, let's say, triumph, nor basically a fall, but it's really a progressive liberation from tradition, from Christianity, from religion, from authority. And so this is the other triumphant view, is positive, progressive theory of modernity. And then you have the fourth one that somehow is critical of all of them, beginning with Nietzsche, and basically that challenges fundamental notions of moral universalism, ordinary life, that are so central to what Taylor calls our modern age, our modern secular age, bringing the alternative of a heroic aristocratic age, basically that revolts against the revolt of the slaves, if you wish, and that basically brings the triumphant virtues of a different type of life that goes beyond good and evil and beyond ordinary life. And what makes Charles' narrative so convincing is that he listens to each of them, takes the valid points of each of them, and weaves them into precisely a story that each of these narratives has some truth to it. And this is not only that then it's a better narrative that each of them individually, because it takes all of them into account and puts them together, but it shows Charles' intellectual openness and personal openness, his ability to listen. I mean, we all have been with Charles in many, many sessions. What characterizes it, all of us will begin talking the whole day. Charles never talks and just listens. And it is ability to listen to others and to take their points that makes his then contributions when he talks or when he writes so unique. So this is about the first, about the grand narrative. Second, which age? I remember when Charles and Habermas, Jürgen Habermas, together got the Kluge Prize from the Library of Congress, and then the following day we had a public session. I was fortunate to moderate it, and I began with the question, Jürgen, Charles, you both basically talk about the same reality, this multiplication of plural options, religious and secular. You call it, this is what the secular age means, and you call it, this is what the post-secular age means. Habermas, right? Habermas calls it the post-secular. Which of the two are right? And again, it's context. We know from Charles' philosophy that all intellectual positions, you have to understand them in particular hermeneutic seats in Levin context. And here, obviously, Charles is an Anglo-Catholic Quebecois that basically has embraced the secular age with joy and hope, I would say, coming from this Catholic background, is part of this unique aggiornamento, Catholic aggiornamento. This is what Gaudium et Spes. We embrace our modern age and our modern world with joy and hope. And this is an opening precisely to the secular age, but of course, with the critical distance, knowing that there are many gains and many losses. Precisely from the grand narrative, each of them points to gains or losses, but the fact is that there are always, on every turn, or every gain entails some losses. And this is again, a secular age is this, on the one hand, you embrace it, but on the other hand, you are aware of what we have lost. And Habermas obviously is the grand theorist of secular modernity. In this respect, he had taken some of the stadial consciousness, the notion that somehow the secular supersedes religion and the metaphysical and everything else. And Habermas came to the conclusion, of course, that there was something, awareness of what was being lost and the need to recover what was being lost. And there was his post-secularist then reflexivity in incorporating, trying to think reflexively about precisely religion and the need still for something beyond purely, let's say, what will be post-metaphysical philosophy. And so is this dual relations, the question is which then, I would argue it is a secular age with post-secularist awareness. This is what our age. On the other hand, we must be aware, especially we Catholics, there are a lot of us, there are a lot of our Catholic brothers, which are now reinventing integralism, the 19th century, and basically a lot of converts to Catholicism convert today because for them Catholicism represents the resistance to everything secular, the resistance to the secular age. And so when the secular age was written, a lot of Catholic groups read precisely together a secular age as something that was unique. The important thing about the book is that it was very important not only for religious moderns, but also for secular moderns. It was the combination of engaging both religious moderns and secular moderns, and both of them basically taking the argument very seriously. So we are, again, it's not finished. It's not finished, and we have a lot of, and many of the people that are part of the new coming administration basically share this resistance to the secular age and to secularism, any form of secularism and secularity. Finally, and this is what the personal level of the book, obviously, the third part of the book is all about Charles opening his soul to us and expressing his own personal thirst for divinization. Divinization, which means theosis. In Greek theology, the Greek fathers. And theosis is part of the theology of incarnation, incarnation being that a person which is fully human and fully divine. So one person, two natures. And the idea is that we have the aspiration to become like Christ and be also fully human and fully divine. So it's this thirst for transcendence beyond human flourishing. We know that precisely axial age interpretations hold power on many of us, certainly Charles Taylor, because it is this discovery of a turn towards transcendence beyond human flourishing. Is there all there is to it? Purely this here secular humanism. And the argument for Charles is no, I want to aspire to something else. And I want to finish, I think that I'm already my time, saying that I think, Charles, as far as I'm concerned, you've reached the dual nature, fully human, fully divine. If this is what sainthood means, if this is what sainthood means in the Catholic tradition, for me, you are a saint. And I think that I welcome you to the communion of the saints of our human Catholic global community. So thank you, thank you.
It may almost qualify as the sort of miracle that is linked to the conferral of sainthood, that Jose has stayed completely within the time limit, been brilliant, and been clear. So that was a terrific launch to our event. Our second speaker was to have been Nilüfer Göle, who is unfortunately ill. Let me mention Nilüfer is a Turkish intellectual based currently in Paris. Among her contributions are explorations of the relationship between what is connoted by the English word secularism and the French word laïcité and the Turkish adoption of laïclik. And explorations thus of secularism in the context of different religious histories and different patterns of modernization. So Nilüfer is not with us, but she has sent remarks which will be presented by Tani Bhargava, herself an important member of the networks of the center and a longtime friend, Charles Taylor. Tani.
I first met Charles Taylor well before his landmark publication, A Secular Age. This was in 1994 during a conference organized by the East-West Center in Honolulu, where we shared a panel on secularism alongside Rajeev Bhargava. Since then, I have been fortunate to be part of a dialogue group with him. For over 3 decades, within the framework of the Research Center for Transcultural Studies initiated by Ben Lee, our discussions evolved free from academic constraints, creating a medium of reflection and dialogue across continents, from Turkey and India to various European cities. Charles's leadership was quiet yet profound. He helped elaborate complex concepts such as secularism, multiple modernities, social imaginaries, public space, expressive individualism, and interculturalism, all notions that have profoundly shaped my own work. My engagement with Charles Taylor's thought has been a journey of lived knowledge, where personal presence, structured dialogue, attentive listening, and a deep intellectual commitment formed the core. Lived knowledge took shape by personal interactions, but also by the historical political events and griefs that have shaped our lives. This is why being unable to be present in person today is a particularly poignant irony. In the late 1980s, I began studying Turkish secularism through the experience of young female students who chose to adopt Islamic coverings. This topic grew especially contentious in the 1990s, particularly within the progressive secular circles, including feminist groups. Questions of religious agency, conservative body politics, and women's participation in public life began to challenge established secular religious boundaries. I sought to understand these emerging religious subjectivities, examining how these women navigated body politics between secular and religious norms. Debates on secularism intensified further in Europe by the presence of Muslims in public life and the visibility of religious symbols and practices in secular spaces. The headscarf controversy in French public schools is a well-known example. I've observed how the French discourse on laïcité has been mobilized to regulate Islamic practices and discipline Muslim subjects. The ongoing dynamic between French secularity and Muslim migrants illustrates how laïcité is being reinterpreted in relation to a religion other than Catholicism, highlighting the evolving complexities of secularism in a multicultural context. Let me very succinctly give 3 key insights that demonstrate Charles Taylor's influence on secularism studies and more specifically on my own work. First, secularism is not a phenomenon that emerges in a vacuum. It should not be studied in isolation from historical and cultural contexts. Instead, secularism must be understood in relation to specific religious traditions, Christianity in the Western world, but also Hinduism in India and Islam in Turkey. Taylor's approach opened up the possibility of recognizing multiple secularism, allowing us to differentiate between different forms and trajectories of secularism. Second, Secularism faces complex challenges from ethnic and religious movements. Thinkers like Michael Walzer have observed a paradox of liberation. Many secular nationalist movements that initially sought liberation are now witnessing a resurgence of religious political discourse and power, as seen in Algeria, India, and Israel. Rather than interpreting this shift as a simple replacement of the secular by the religious, Taylor argued that the return of religion represents a dynamic recomposition. Earlier forms of religious life have been dissolved and destabilized, making space for the emergence of a new religious expression. Third, while secularism is often understood primarily as state-level regulation separating church and state, Taylor's work offers a long-term narrative, including the transformation of individual subjects' experience and the ways in which they navigate their religious and secular identities, shaping and circulating new social imaginaries within the public sphere. A final word on Charles Taylor as an engaged public intellectual. The well-known commission co-chaired by Taylor and Bouchard was established to examine secularism through direct engagement with the representatives of religious and cultural diversity in Quebec. Through a series of meetings and hearings with members of religious and cultural minorities, the Commission explored possibilities for regional accommodation. To my knowledge, their report and recommendations had only a limited impact. However, I had the opportunity to attend one of the focus groups they organized, which I found to be a remarkable example of engaging in the negotiation of cultural differences. Truly an instance of interculturalism in practice. It reminded me of the similarities with the experimental public space methodology I developed to examine Islamic controversies across 20 European cities, where both Muslim and non-Muslim citizens were brought together to engage in dialogue on divisive issues. I do not think that my work had a significant impact. The debates surrounding secularism and Islam in many parts of the world have been anything but smooth. These discussions have often stirred strong emotions and over time escalated into contentious public disputes. Academic spaces, which once provided a shield for intellectual exploration, provide insufficient to protect public intellectuals from intense scrutiny and criticism. Frequently, as public intellectuals, we found ourselves under attack, our ideas and intentions questioned in the broader public sphere. Although many of us initially believed in the possibility of progressing towards a more inclusive and pluralistic society, the charged climate led to a diminished role for critical intellectuals. We lost the privileged position once afforded to us to question, analyze, and critique without fear of reprisal. This shift reflects a broader societal discomfort with the intellectual examination of secularism, especially when it intersects with religious expression. Today, the role of public intellectuals is fraught with challenges as the space for critical reflection on issues like secularism and religious identity have become more polarized. Charles Taylor's work and presence continue to offer both timeless insight and personal empowerment in navigating these complexities.
Third, we will hear from Rajeev Bhargava, who is at the Center for the Study of Developing Societies in India, and whose association with Charles Taylor, like mine, dates back to when we were all at Oxford. And Rajeev formed a close relationship as a student of Charles Taylor's, as well as Stephen Lewis and others, wrote extensively on individualism, on liberalism, on multiculturalism, and indeed on secularism. Rajeev.
Thank you, Dilip and Jocelyn, all the organizers, and thank you, Craig, for your generous introduction. Charles has been, it goes without saying, a very major inspiration to all of us. And he has guided us not by instruction, but by example, point that has been made
by others as well. There have been many, many occasions on which I've talked directly of his work, but today I'm going to speak somewhat indirectly on how a secular age is helping me think about the long-term cultural and social transformations taking place in India. Recall that Taylor begins his monumental 2007 study of the secular by the following sentence: "We live in a secular age." And then he immediately specifies that by we, he means those living in the North Atlantic world. By implication, one might think that those not living in the North Atlantic world could be living in an age which is not secular. Notice also that the title of this book is A Secular Age, so he leaves open the possibility there are either alternative other secular ages or that there are some non-secular ages. And this implication that I just drew, that we could be living in an age of religion, is not incorrect, because he immediately spells out in the very next sentence, compared, and I'm quoting him, compared to other contemporary societies such as India or North Atlantic societies in the past. So societies, the same North Atlantic societies in the past may be living in, it doesn't specify, in age of religion, and India could still be living in the age of religion. Now, this could be read as a kind of presumption, but I believe that this is largely true. We are living in an age of religion. And some people might think that this is not something new. We've been always living in an age of religion. This is, a general sort of feeling of India being always spiritual, India being always religious. But I want to contest that. And I want to say that that's not the case. I want to ask, in fact, how old is this age of religion in India? And if it is not very old, when did it emerge? So, as far as I can tell, this age of religion begins just about the same time as the secular age is ushered in the North Atlantic world. We did not have religion before that. We did not live in an age of religion. It sounds very counterintuitive, but I'll try to spell out what I mean by that. Now, to be sure, something like religion had taken a toehold in India back in the 11th, 12th century, when Arabs and Turks brought with them some idea of mazhab, which could easily be translated as religion. But really, it's only in the 19th century that this idea of religion got consolidated in the subcontinent. And it's largely a handiwork. Of course, the inspirations come from many places. I mentioned Islam, but one can also talk about Christianity. But it's a handiwork, ironically and largely, of the Indian middle class. 19th century Indian middle class had a project of making India a land of religion. So what we have been undergoing since the late 18th century, I mean, the roots of it can be taken back even further, but since what we've been going through since the late 18th century is what I've elsewhere called the process of religionization. It is a project which is still unfinished, it is not fulfilled, it is incomplete, and it is contested.
Uh, but we are going through that process. So I'm not quite sure that I agree with Charles that all pre-modern polities were in some way connected to, based on, grounded in some faith or adherence to God, and that only modern Western state is free from that connection. And that only now do we have a political society which is for believers and unbelievers alike. I don't think that's the case, certainly for India. I don't think God was a default option and that believers and unbelievers did not live together. And I'm sure Charles would agree with me. We've discussed one of my very, really influenced a lot by Ashoka, and he was already in the 3rd century BC talking about how different sort of practitioners and believers and unbelievers could live together, and he was already founding the principles of some proto-political liberalism in a pluralist society. So, in the past, India had religio-philosophical perspectives and experiences, but no religion proper. In other words, and to continue with, I'm sort of taking on from some of the initial pages of A Secular Age, one can imagine a public life in India, without invoking or encountering God. One could have authoritative prescriptions, rituals, and ceremonies which are not related to God. And from the 1st and 2nd century after the Common Era, God did begin to appear in some discourses. You find the first major appearance of Ishvara, or God, in the Bhagavad Gita, which was composed in the 1st century after the Common Era. But it never really had a decisive presence. It was not dominant. And belief in God was hardly unchallenged. There were all kinds of contestations and challenges that were taking place to this new idea, which was appearing in the Bhagavad Gita of Krishna as the all omnipotent, omnipresent God. Belief in God was certainly not a default option. There were lots and lots of other options available. So in some senses, what we on chances call secular as plural availability of many options. I think that's there in India. Belief in God is one option among others. It is one possibility, but certainly not the major one. Among elites, it's absolutely absent. The first millennia of after the Common Era is full of philosophical disputations where there is no mention of God. Mimamsa, Sankhya, the 2 major philosophies. Buddhism, Jainism, it's very hard to even call them religions. These are philosophies or religio-philosophical frameworks, but they do not have any commitment to God. They're atheistic. So, this is true of the elite philosophy is completely atheistic, and if you're using these terms in India to the 11th century. But some of these ideas of God and gods and goddesses, they did emerge in popular culture. But as I said, this is just one option. So I would say that in India, we aren't moving from an age of religion to a secular age. Rather, we are moving from an as yet unnamed age, perhaps secular in Charles's sense, to the age of religion. Our contemporary era, modern era, the newest era that we are in is the age of religion. So now this begs the famous Taylorian question. What are the conditions of belief and action which constitutive of the age of religion? And here let me introduce, once again I'm inspired by Charles, at least in one respect. Let me introduce a distinction between what we might call an ethics of ultimate self-fulfillment, an ethics of ultimate self-realization, or to borrow a term that Chuck has now introduced, fullness, a path to fullness on the one hand, to be distinguished from norms of social interaction on the other. These are social directives, which include a moral code. These directives are what one must do and what must not do, both in relation to oneself in our social world, and what we must do and not do in relation to others. So prohibitions and permissions, particularly in relation to others, and therefore I'm calling it a moral code. And these are like, what we may or may not eat, what kind of work we may or may not do, who we may dine with, who we may or may not marry, and so on and so forth. So these are two different kinds of entities or modes of living or action. One is what I call ethics of self-fulfillment, and the other norms of social interaction. Now, this distinction is important, and I hope, how much time do I have? 5 minutes? 7 minutes, okay. I think 7 minutes.
3 to 5.
Oh, I'll just stop whenever you tell me to. Well, okay, quickly then. I think the first thing that happens is that in some time, these are the conditions of the emergence of what I call religion proper. I mean, one can say one particular conception of religion, but it doesn't really make a difference to my argument. The emergence of religion proper, the first crucial thing is the idea of an exclusive and emphatic conception of truth that sets one God apart from everything else. That is not God. That sets one God apart from all other gods, and which claims that this God alone is true and all other gods are false, and that you shall not worship these other gods. So likewise, a whole system of beliefs and actions surrounding this true God is to be separated from other systems of beliefs, which now are called superstitious or heretic or pagan, and so on. And in the extreme cases, some of these adherents of who are now believed to be false gods are thought to be radical outsiders. They're not just rivals, but also enemies. Adherence to one's own God comes with an enemy to be fought. And so either you assimilate this radical other into your own fold, or you see them as existential threats who you can't live with. Now, I think that this is one important condition of the formation of what we might call religion. And I personally believe that when people like Ticino, and when they said that we are followers of Christ, they meant following Christ as an example for good character and for good conduct, rather than, and this is something that I learned from Wilfred Cantwell Smith, who admired, and who's a Montreal guy, taught at McGill. We were talking about it the other day, and Jack and I have talked about him quite a lot. Who is I forget what I was going to say, but anyway, that's the first condition: the introduction of the idea of truth and falsehood. The second condition is, and here I bring in ethics of self-fulfillment and norms of social interaction. The connection between them can be either very loose or it can be very tight. so tight, in fact, that they form one comprehensive system. And that's the second feature of what I call religion. It's a comprehensive system, so that if you believe in an ethic, you automatically have to be part of that social and moral code. And if you're part of that social moral code, that can only be because you believe in one path to self-fulfillment, which you consider to be the true path. So it's just, you are committing yourself to one system. Now, that's the second. I won't go any further. And the third condition is that at some stage, this community of people who believe in this one true belief system, comprehensive system, must have political power of its own. And if it doesn't have political power, then it must have at least a monopolistic privilege in that polity, some form of establishment of its own religion. Now, if you look at this whole thing in this way, then you can understand the emergence of what we understand as classic, not the Charles sense. And Charles is providing a completely different and radically new narrative, which is very inspirational of the secular. But you can understand the emergence of the more conventional understanding of Western secularism. It's a reaction to this religion. Now, were these conditions present in ancient India? I would say no. No idea of true and false God. It's a continuum. Nobody is able to ever fully establish that somebody who's not following or not adhering to his or her ethics is actually doing or following something which can be called false. There were degrees of truth and falseness, but nobody could fully establish a very sharp boundary between one and the other. There was no full so the demarcation between different communities also did not exist. The one true community, other false communities. As a matter of fact, the fluidity of people from moving from one to the other, people calling themselves both Hindu and Muslim, the Aga Khan, the sect of the Aga Khan, the Khojas, believing in the Dashavatars, having 9 avatars, which are exactly the same as the Hindus, and the 10th avatar, instead of being Kalki, which is in the Hindu tradition, the 10th avatar becomes Muhammad. So this kind of hybridity and this kind of mixing, this kind of multiple allegiances, multiple attachments, and this fluid movement is something that is going on well into the 16th century, 17th century. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of individualism, something that you don't associate with India. Religious individualism, people making their own choices of which god they want to worship and which path they must choose in order to. And this is something which I have not gathered earlier. I've now been reading a lot of Kabir, and the 15th century poet, and I find him one of the most radically individualist saints, poet saints of that period. And the point I'm quickly going to make, because I'm running out of time, the point I want to make is that you could have your own God, you can have your own worship, as long as you remain committed to a social system which everybody shared. And that's the point. There is no comprehensive system. These two remain separate. There are multiple, the proliferation of paths to ultimate self-fulfillment, but there is a commitment to a social system, which of course is a very nasty one at that time. It's the caste structure. So even when Muslims and Hindus come to India, as far as the Hindus are concerned, and slowly even for the Muslims, they become member of a caste and then they follow Allah. Syrian Christians, they are still considered to be Brahmins by many people. Their own autobiography suggests that they were Brahmins at some point of time, but they're of course followers of Christ. So caste system was one thing, and ethics of a path to self-fulfillment was another, and this is something that remains. And third, never in India was the state committed only to one religion or one ethics, and never was it patronizing monopolistic privilege given to only one. There may be a few instances here and there, but that was an exception. Now, all this is changing since the 19th century. The emergence of mutually exclusive communities, people, Hindus saying that they have some exclusive claim to, well, not quite truth, but something. The caste system not being seen as something separate, but integral to Hinduism. So Hindu social reformers on the one hand are attacking the caste system, and on the other hand, some Orthodox people are supporting it. And number three, which is the latest thing that is happening, a community of Hindus, which is united for the first time by creed, which they've invented, one book, one this. They are now demanding that they have a state of their own, so a Hindu state. So these are unprecedented developments. Nobody could anticipate them. We are not moving to a secular age, but we're moving instead to the age of religion, in the sense in which I have explicated it. I know that it may not be acceptable to everybody, and it certainly goes against the tremendously fantastic account that is found in Charles's work. But nonetheless, this is one plausible way of reading what's happening in India. Thank you.
Thanks, Rajeev, for a rich exploration of a grand narrative, different from the grand narrative structuring Charles' book, A Secular Age, and a demonstration of one of the ways in which that book in particular and many works of Charles Taylor's have had important impacts. They have launched conversations. They have shaped the dialogue that has followed. So it is not simply by having followers, but by having engagement that Chuck's work has had such a profound impact. And I will also note that our three speakers, especially the first two, were remarkably disciplined in their use of time. And so we have a little bit of that. There's a theory of economic history, not religious history, that says economic history begins a bit more with religion and begins not with Adam Smith's propensity to truck and barter, but with debt. And so we are in the debt of our panelists who did not use their full time. We do not propose to return that time to them, but to invite any of you that may wish to make a comment on A Secular Age or the issues raised to do so now, but use the microphone. And identify yourself.
Hello, my name is Michael Steinberg. I thought it might be interesting to have the two speakers who are actually physically present to engage in this maybe a brief dialogue or a question answer to each other, because it seems to me that you are presenting both in terms of grand narrative and historical reflection, not incompatible, but very different interpretations of, let's say, the last 200 years.
Of course, if I may comment to Rajeev's, my dear Rajeev's comments. Of course, we know that in the last 20 years in religious studies, we're aware that the concept of religion and the secular are very modern concepts. The concept of religion only emerges slowly in the 16th, only really materialized in the 17th century as both as a single category. Religions in the plural in the 6th century meant Dominicans, Franciscans, etc. This is what all religions meant. When I studied the Jesuits around the world, they never used the word religion. They talk of faith. There are a lot of Santa Fe's, cities of Santa Fe's all over the colonies. There is no Santa religion anywhere. There are teachings. They are the Jewish, Muslim, Christian law. They are the teachings of the East, teachings of the West. Never use the concept of religion. So we know that. And we know that all the isms are a product of the 19th century. There is no Catholicism and Protestantism even in the 18th century yet. It only emerges all the isms in the end of the 18th, 19th century. So the question is, what are we talking about? Yes, this concept of religion, the way it developed in the 16th, 17th century, is the one that is being institutionalized in India since the 19th century. But then the question that Charles raises is about the cosmic vision, right? So the notion that we move from a cosmic order in which nature, society, and humans are interconnected and is part of the same cosmic order is fragmented, disappears, and we have the immanent frame, which is within which the secular age. So the question, of course, is, I think there was before in India also a cosmic order in which nature, all of nature, including animals and everything, humans, society were integrated. I mean, this is the kind of the Durkheimian model, right? The question, of course, we have, I mean, Charles talks of post-Durkheimian new, what did we concept use post-Durkheimian? Yes. So, yes, I think you are right in the sense that this is the age of religion in the way in which religion in the modern world was constructed. But the other issue is the extent to which the whole cosmic order has been precisely transformed by science, by politics, by economy, and this obviously is happening in India as well. So
You're exactly right. Of course, there are visions of a cosmic order, and there are visions which in the Upanishad of the Brahma, and so there is a certain conception of ultimate reality, but that could be. I mean, there is no. I don't know what word to use to describe that word. I actually call it unnamed. I have to think about it, and I'm sure people like Charles and you can help me do that. But I had also specified, what religion is in terms of those three conditions. I think there is a long durée development of that in Europe and the West, and something rapidly is happening in India in exactly the same way. But in terms of plurality of options, I think that is, and multiple allegiances, I think that is something that was very, it could be experienced, it was present very vividly, even until the 18th century in India, and it continues to exist on the margins today. But the dominant default option today is are you a Hindu or a Muslim? And the two communities are in conflict. They're seeing each other as rivals, and there is a lot of communal violence. A partition of India took place because of that. So the new nation states were formed because of that. So something that happened in Europe in the 16th, 17th century.
it's the confessionalization.
Yeah, the confessionalization, and that is happening now. I mean, the idea, it was born in 1925 that the Hindus are an exclusive group and they need a state of their own, and it's being realized by the Hindutva, by the BJP now.
I'm not a Quaker, and I'm not going to wait for the voice to come. Maybe one comment on just what you've heard, which is the importance of the extent to which a secular age, as Chuck discussed it, is not about unbelief or the loss of belief or a secularization, the third of his senses in the book, but is about the creation of a set of institutions, approaches to belief and understanding the world that grow on grounds other than those of an integrated religious view in various different ways. Okay. We will return to some of these discussions when we discuss cosmic connections at the end of today, Chuck's most recent book, which raises some of the same considerations. So now, let me suggest you get a cup of coffee and reconvene at 10:30 here. Thank you.